The white corridors of the research vessel glowed with the soft blue light from the observation window. Dr. Smith stood there, his weathered hands pressed against the transparent material as he watched the strange patterns of light dance across the void of space. The other scientists on board, beings from a dozen different worlds, had dismissed these phenomena as natural disturbances, but Smith knew better. There was something alive out there. The ship's sensors had picked up these energy patterns for weeks now, following their research route through the lesser explored regions of the galaxy. While his alien colleagues saw only dangerous anomalies to be avoided, Smith noticed patterns. These weren't random energy bursts. They moved with purpose, responded to changes in their environment, and even seemed to react to the presence of ships. Dr. Smith, the Council representatives request your presence in the main laboratory, the ship's AI announced. Smith straightened his white coat and headed down the corridor, his footsteps echoing against the metal floor. The other scientists called him stubborn, perhaps even reckless, but 30 years of studying alien life had taught him one thing. Life found a way to exist in the most unexpected forms. The main laboratory buzzed with activity. Tall, willowy beings with silver skin worked alongside stocky creatures covered in protective shells. At the center of the room, a holographic display showed the latest energy readings. The patterns were clearer now than ever before. These disturbances have destroyed 3 unmanned probes this month alone, said First Observer Jones, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence. We must mark this sector as hazardous and move our research elsewhere. Smith cleared his throat. With respect, First Observer, I believe we're looking at this all wrong. These aren't just energy disturbances. They're living creatures. The room fell silent. Then, like a wave, murmurs of dismissal and concern spread among the gathered scientists. Living creatures made of pure energy. It seemed impossible to them. What evidence do you have for this rather human interpretation? Asked Dr. Green, a being made mostly of crystalline structures. Her tone carried the familiar note of skepticism that Smith had grown used to over the years. Smith stepped forward and manipulated the hologram. Look at these patterns. They're not random. See how they pulse. It's like a heartbeat. And here, when our probes approached, the energy fields didn't just destroy them. They examined them first, almost like curiosity. The gathered scientists watched as Smith played back the recordings. The strange lights would approach each probe, circle it slowly, and only when the probe attempted to take readings did the energy surge and destroy it. Even if you're right, Jones said, these beings are clearly too dangerous to study. We should report them as a hazard and move on. But Smith wasn't listening anymore. His attention had turned back to the observation window, where something extraordinary was happening. One of the energy patterns had broken away from the others and was approaching the ship. Unlike its previous encounters with vessels, it moved slowly, almost cautiously. The ship's alarms began to blare. Energy surge detected. Emergency protocols engaging. The AI announced. Wait, Smith called out as the other scientists rushed to initiate defensive measures. Look at its approach pattern. It's different this time. It's gentle. The being outside pulsed with soft light, creating patterns that reminded Smith of the bioluminescent creatures in Earth's deep oceans. As the ship's automatic defenses prepared to activate, Smith made a decision that would change the course of human history. He ran to the nearest control panel and override the defensive protocols using his emergency authorization. The other scientists shouted in protest, but Smith stood firm. Outside the window, the energy being continued its approach, its patterns becoming more complex and intricate. Sometimes, Smith said quietly, more to himself than to his colleagues, you have to trust that the unknown isn't always hostile. Sometimes, you just have to be bold enough to reach out. As the beam drew closer, its light filled the observation window with colors that had no names in any human language. And in that moment, as his alien colleagues watched in mixed horror and amazement, Smith smiled. He knew that this wasn't just a discovery, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its willingness to take risks, to reach out into the unknown with hope instead of fear. The energy being pressed against the ship's hull, and for the first time in recorded history, it didn't attack. Instead, it began to pulse in a steady rhythm, almost like it was trying to speak. The Prometheus hung in space like a silver needle against the black cloth of the universe. Its hull sparkled with strange patterns, the result of months of work adapting the ship's systems to handle the unique energy signatures they discovered. Captain Rogers stood on the bridge, watching his crew make final preparations for humanity's boldest step yet. "All systems are ready, Captain," reported his first officer, Wilson. "The modified shields are holding steady at 98%. Rogers nodded, his eyes fixed on the swirling lights in the distance. The energy beings had gathered there, their bodies creating a stunning display that put the Northern Lights to shame. The Galactic Council had warned them repeatedly about this mission. They'd called it foolish, reckless, typically human. But that was exactly why humanity had to try. "Begin approach sequence," Rogers ordered. "Keep our energy signature low and friendly, just like we practiced." The Prometheus moved forward slowly, its modified shields giving off a soft, pulsing glow designed to mimic the peaceful patterns Dr. Smith had observed. The crew held their breath as they entered the outer edge of the energy being's gathering space. The closest being noticed them first. It turned, its body shifting from blue to a curious purple. Others followed, their massive forms dwarfing the human ship. Each one was the size of a small moon, their bodies made of pure energy that rippled and flowed like liquid light. "They're responding to our signal," Wilson said, excitement creeping into his voice. The beings had begun to pulse in rhythm with the ship's shields, creating a beautiful light show that filled the bridge with dancing colors. Then something unexpected happened. One of the beings broke from the group and approached the ship directly. Unlike their previous encounters with vessels, there was no sign of aggression. Instead, it moved with what could only be described as grace, its energy field carefully controlled to avoid overwhelming the ship's systems. "Hold position," Rogers commanded. "Let them make the next move." The being circled the Prometheus slowly, its body changing colors as it examined different parts of the ship. The crew watched in amazement as it seemed to focus on their communication array, the part of the ship specifically designed to interact with their kind. "Sir," called out Brown from the science station, "it's attempting to match our communication frequency." Rogers smiled. This was what they had hoped for, what they had built the Prometheus for. "Open the channel. Let's say hello." The ship's specially designed communication system activated, sending out pulses of energy in carefully controlled patterns. The being responded immediately, its entire form lighting up with complex patterns that the ship's computers began to translate. The first message was simple, basic mathematical sequences that proved the being's intelligence. The crew responded with their own sequences, adding new patterns to show they understood. Hours passed as the two species learned to talk, their language of light and energy growing more complex with each exchange. "Captain," Wilson said softly, "the other beings are approaching." One by one, the entire group had drawn closer to the Prometheus, each one adding its own patterns to the conversation. The ship's computers worked overtime to process the incoming information, but one thing was becoming clear. These weren't just intelligent beings, they were a highly advanced civilization that humans had simply never learned to see before. "They're asking about us," Brown reported, reading the translations, "about where we come from, why we're different from the other ships they've encountered." Rogers stepped forward, his hand touching the view screen where the being's light show continued to play out. "Tell them we come as friends, as explorers. Tell them we want to learn from them and share what we know." The response came back almost immediately, a burst of colors so bright and complex that it took the computers several minutes to translate. When it finally appeared on screen, the message was simple but profound. At last, someone brave enough to listen. The crew of the Prometheus looked at each other, the weight of the moment settling on their shoulders. They had done what no other species had dared to try. They had reached out to the unknown with hope instead of fear, with curiosity instead of caution. And in doing so, they had opened a door that would change both species forever. The emergency alarms on the Galactic Council station screamed through the night cycle. Red lights flashed across worried faces as representatives from 100 worlds gathered in the main chamber. The massive view screen showed a sight that chilled them to their cores. A storm of energy beings, thousands strong, moving through space like a river of living light. 3 colony worlds had already been evacuated. The energy beings' migration path cut through populated space like a knife, leaving damaged stations and disrupted shipping lanes in their wake. Not even the Council's most powerful ships could redirect them. Dr. Smith stood before the Council, his face illuminated by the holographic display showing the beings' trajectory. The next system in their path is New Haven, one of our largest colonies. There are 2 million people there, and we don't have enough ships to evacuate them all in time. The council chamber erupted in voices. Some called for using weapons to force the beings away. Others demanded the colony be sacrificed to preserve the peace they'd built with these creatures. The council head raised all 4 hands for silence. "We cannot risk attacking them," the head announced. "The energy beings have shown themselves to be peaceful when left alone. This is simply their natural migration pattern." Natural or not, it will kill millions, Wilson argued from his place beside Smith. The first officer of the Prometheus had seen firsthand what the being's energy fields could do to human technology. "We have to try something." Smith stepped forward. His eyes. The Prometheus hung at the edge of space, its hull gleaming with newly installed energy collectors. Commander Walker watched the final modifications through the bridge window, knowing each one had to be perfect. They would only get one chance at this. "Shield modifications are complete," reported the engineering chief. "But sir, even with the upgrades, we can only last 10 minutes inside the migration. After that, the energy levels will overwhelm our systems." Walker nodded. 10 minutes to save 2 million lives. That will have to be enough. The energy storm filled half the sky now, a river of living light flowing through space. The beings moved as one massive group, their combined power enough to tear through any normal ship's defenses. But the Prometheus wasn't normal anymore. "Last chance to back out," Smith said quietly, standing beside Walker. The scientist's eyes were fixed on the readings flooding his screens. The Council's evacuation ships could save at least some of the colonists. "Some isn't good enough," Walker replied. He pressed the ship-wide communication button. "All hands, battle stations, begin approach sequence." The Prometheus turned toward the migration, its engines pulsing with carefully controlled power. They had studied the beings' movements for weeks now, learning their patterns. The key was to match their energy signature, to become part of their flow rather than fight against it. Entering the outer edge in 3, 2, 1. The ship shuddered as the first waves of energy washed over it. The shield modifications held, creating a bubble of stability in the chaos. Around them, thousands of energy beings flowed past like a school of fish made of starlight. "Shield strength at 90%, called out the engineer. Energy absorption systems functioning within parameters. Walker watched the beings carefully. They hadn't reacted to the ship's presence yet. The first part of the plan was working. The Prometheus was mimicking their energy patterns enough to avoid detection. Now came the hard part. "Take us deeper," he ordered. "We need to reach the Elders." The ship pushed forward, diving deeper into the migration. Each movement had to be perfect. Too fast would draw attention. Too slow would waste precious time. The shield strength ticked down steadily. 80%, 70, 60. There. Smith pointed at a cluster of larger beings near the center of the migration. Their patterns were more complex, their movements more deliberate. "Those are the ones leading them." 40% shield strength, warned the engineer. 5 minutes until critical failure. Walker took a deep breath. Everything they'd learned about communicating with the beings had led to this moment. "Begin transmission sequence." full power to the communication array. The Prometheus's specially designed transmitters activated, sending out complex patterns of energy that mimicked the being's own language. They had spent weeks crafting this message, putting everything they knew about the being's communication into it. At first, nothing happened. The migration continued its relentless flow around them, the elders maintaining their course. Then, suddenly, one of the largest beings turned toward them. Shield strength at 20%. 3 minutes remaining. The being approached the ship, its massive form dwarfing them completely. Instead of the simple patterns they usually saw, its body rippled with complex symbols, a language more advanced than any they'd seen before. "It's working," Smith shouted over the groaning of the ship's straining systems. "They're responding to our message. The patterns, they're asking why we're here." Walker stepped forward, his hand steady as he activated the final sequence they'd prepared. The ship's remaining power poured into one last transmission. Images of New Haven, its people, the devastation the migration would cause. Shield failure in 60 seconds. The elder being's form pulsed with new patterns, spreading them outward like ripples in a pond. Around them, the entire migration began to shift, its course altering degree by degree. "They understand," Smith whispered. "They're changing course." Walker watched in awe as the river of light began to bend around their position, creating a new path that would miss New Haven completely. They had done it. They had reached across the gulf between species and found understanding. As the Prometheus limped back to safety, its shields nearly gone, Walker smiled. Once again, humanity's willingness to take the impossible risk had paid off. The medical bay of the research station hummed with activity as Walker lay in the scanning chamber. The incident had happened 3 days ago, a routine communication attempt with an energy being that had produced unexpected results. When the being had matched frequencies with Walker's ship, he had felt something strange in his mind, like a song he couldn't quite remember. "These readings are fascinating," Dr. Smith said, studying the brain scans. "Your neural patterns have changed. They're oscillating at the same frequency the beings use to communicate." Walker sat up slowly, his head still buzzing with the lingering connection. "It wasn't just communication," he explained. "It was like we understood each other. Not just words or pictures, but feelings, intentions." The discovery had been accidental. During a routine patrol, Walker's ship had encountered a young energy being separated from its group. Instead of following standard protocols, Walker had tried something new. He had powered down all shields and reached out with the bare minimum of energy signatures. The being had responded not to the ship's signals, but to Walker himself. The connection had lasted only seconds, but it had changed everything they thought they knew about these creatures. "Look at this," Smith pointed to a new scan. "Your brain's electromagnetic field is naturally resonating at frequencies similar to their base communication patterns. And these patterns," he paused, excitement clear in his voice, "they're unique to human neural structure. Other species had tried for months to establish deeper connections with the energy beings, but none had succeeded. Their neural patterns were too different, too rigid. But human brains, with their remarkable plasticity and complex electromagnetic fields, could adapt and sync with the being's natural frequencies. We need to test this properly," Smith said, already planning the experiments. "If we can understand how this connection works, we might be able to train others." Over the next weeks, more humans came forward to attempt contact. Not everyone could establish the connection. It required a particular type of mental focus, a willingness to open one's mind to something entirely alien. But those who could reported the same experience. A deep, almost intuitive understanding of the energy being's thoughts and feelings. Walker worked with each volunteer, teaching them what he had learned. "Don't try to force it," he would say. "Think of it like learning to float in water. The harder you try, the more likely you are to sink." The energy beings responded to this new development with increasing curiosity. More of them began approaching human ships, seeking out these strange creatures who could touch their minds. The younger ones were especially eager. their patterns shifting with excitement whenever they made contact. It's not just about controlling them or directing their movements, Walker explained to the Galactic Council during a progress report. It's about partnership. They're teaching us as much as we're teaching them. The Council watched in amazement as Walker demonstrated the connection. His brain patterns, displayed on the large screen, shifted to match those of the energy being floating outside the station. Through this bond, he could understand the being's intentions, its desires, its concerns. This is why they were destroying our probes, he explained. They thought we were trying to trap them, to cage them. Now they understand we want to work with them, not control them. Smith stood beside his friend, watching the beautiful dance of light as the being responded to Walker's thoughts. We didn't tame them, he said quietly. We learned to speak their language, not just with our technology, but with our minds. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not only made first contact with these powerful beings, they had found a way to truly understand them. It was a gift unique to their species, born from their adaptable minds and their willingness to reach out into the unknown. As Walker ended the demonstration, the energy being pulsed with a pattern they had come to recognize as joy. Through their connection, he could feel its eagerness to learn, to explore, to work together. The future had suddenly become much brighter, filled with possibilities that neither species could have imagined alone. The training facility orbited Earth like a shining beacon, its special hull designed to withstand the constant presence of energy beings. Inside, Walker watched as the newest class of human shepherds practiced their connection techniques. 20 young men and women floated in specially designed chambers, their minds reaching out to the beings that danced around the station. Their progress is remarkable, Smith noted, checking the neural readings. This class is achieving stable connections twice as fast as the first group. The development of energy being shepherding had happened faster than anyone expected. Once humans understood how to connect with the beings, applications for the program had flooded in from across Earth's colonies. Not everyone had the right mental patterns to form the bond, but those who did showed incredible potential. Outside the station's main window, 3 Shepherd graduates worked with their energy being partners, guiding them through complex maneuvers. The beings responded to their mental commands with fluid grace, their massive forms weaving patterns that looked like art made of starlight. The Council is worried, Smith said quietly, watching the display. Some representatives think we're becoming too powerful too quickly. He wasn't wrong. In just 6 months, human shepherds had revolutionized space travel. Energy beings could safely guide ships through dangerous regions, protect stations from solar storms, and even help with deep space exploration. Humanity's unique ability to bond with these creatures had given them an advantage no one had expected. They're not weapons, Walker replied, touching the window. They're partners, friends. The Council needs to understand that. A young shepherd named Tom floated past the window, his energy being partner wrapping around him in a protective cocoon. Through their shared connection, the beam could keep him safe in space without a suit for short periods. It was this level of trust that worried the other species the most. The mining guild is particularly upset, Smith continued. Our shepherd teams are making their shield technology obsolete. They're claiming we're destroying their economy. Walker turned from the window to face his old friend. Then they should adapt. We've offered to share everything we've learned. It's not our fault that their species can't form the same connections we can. Inside the training chambers, the new shepherds were finishing their daily practice. Each one had formed a unique bond with their energy being partners. Some were better at navigation, others at communication, and a few showed promise in the newly developing field of energy art, creating stunning displays by working in harmony with the beings. Look at them, Walker said softly. A year ago, we thought these beings were just dangerous anomalies. Now they're helping us reach further into space than we ever dreamed possible. A small group of Council observers stood at the far end of the observation deck, their varied forms casting strange shadows. They had come to assess the program, to determine if humans were handling their unique ability responsibly. Their reports would determine the future of human energy being cooperation. Tom had finished his spacewalk and was demonstrating how his partner could safely transport him back to the station. Dr. Smith stood at the observation deck of the newly completed Shepard Station 1, his aged hands resting on the railing as he watched the spectacular light show outside. Energy beings and their human partners moved in perfect harmony, creating the first permanent space lane between Earth and the Centauri colonies. 20 years had passed since that first contact aboard the research vessel. Now, the sight of energy beings working alongside humans had become common across the galaxy. The beings twisted and flowed through space, their massive forms creating safe corridors for ships to travel through dangerous regions. "The last connection is almost complete," Walker said, joining his old friend at the window. Though his hair had gone gray, his eyes still held the same excitement they had shown during those first shepherding attempts. "Hard to believe how far we've come." Outside, young Shepherd Anne guided her partner through the final sequence. The beam's light pulsed in complex patterns, linking with others to form a stable pathway through space. Ships would be able to travel through these lanes at speeds that were impossible before, protected by the being's natural ability to control energy in space. The Council finally approved unlimited expansion of the program. Walker continued, showing Smith the official document on his tablet. "They've accepted that we can be trusted with this partnership." Smith smiled, remembering all the doubts and fears they had faced. Other species had warned that humans were moving too fast, taking too many risks. But time had proven that humanity's approach was right. The energy beings weren't meant to be avoided or controlled. They were meant to be understood. A small transport ship passed by the window, guided safely through the lane by the combined efforts of beings and shepherds. Inside, passengers from a dozen different worlds watched in wonder as barriers that had once seemed impossible simply melted away. "We've got teams starting work in the Orion sector next month," Walker said. "The beings found some interesting phenomena out there they want to show us. Things no human has ever seen." This was perhaps the greatest gift of the partnership. The energy being's natural understanding of space and energy had opened up new fields of science that humans had never imagined. Together, they were pushing the boundaries of what was possible. "Do you remember what you told me?" Walker asked, turning to his mentor. "That first day when we made contact. You said sometimes you have to trust that the unknown isn't always hostile." Smith nodded, watching as more beings joined the work outside, their lights creating patterns that made the stars themselves seem dim. "We were right to reach out," he said quietly. "Right to be bold when others were cautious." A group of new Shepherd trainees passed behind them, their excited chatter filling the corridor. Each wore the silver pins that marked them as candidates, eager to find their own partners among the energy beings. The program had grown beyond anything Smith had imagined possible. "They're calling this the beginning of a new age of exploration," Walker said. "With the being's help, we can reach parts of space we never thought possible. And they're just as excited as we are to discover what's out there." Smith touched the window one last time, feeling the slight vibration from the energy being's work outside. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not through force or fear, but through their unique ability to reach out and connect. Their willingness to take risks, to trust in the unknown, had changed everything. As the last connections of the space lane locked into place, the energy beings celebrated with a display that lit up half the sector. Their human partners joined in, their shared joy visible in the intricate patterns they created together. It was more than just a partnership now. It was proof that the greatest discoveries came to those bold enough to try the impossible.